welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get it started then. So, welcome to Legislative Basics. My name is Tylee Harmon, and I am the director for the Statewide Independent Living Council. And this is Mary. I'll let her introduce herself.
Yes, my name is Mary Urie. I'm with the Utah Developmental Disabilities Council, commonly abbreviated as UDDC, and I am the Policy Program Support Specialist there.
And we're lucky to have her. Mary knows a lot of things. I've learned things from Mary, so I'm glad that I get to present with her today. So today we are going to learn about the basics of the legislature. So here are a couple of goals for today that we want you guys to come away with an understanding of what the legislature is and bills and how that works, and then who can help you with your requests, because we want to make sure we're talking to the right person, how to be heard, and give you an opportunity, obviously, to connect with peers with the same requests. We're all here under the same goal, and that is to advocate for people with disabilities. And then always an opportunity to practice advocating, or at least we'll give you some take-home tools that you can use to, sorry, I'm gonna close this chat. I keep seeing messages and I keep getting distracted. So give you a chance to formulate your story in a way that helps legislators to take you seriously, and then also to get excited about being involved. Okay, so legislative advocacy seems like this really big, scary, unapproachable thing. But really, all it is seeing a need and finding a way for you to address it. So what you can do yourself. And our lawmakers want to hear from us. That's something that I need to remind myself of sometimes, because I feel like it's a little bit intimidating to approach them, but you are the expert at being a person with a disability. They don't know our disability world, so it's our job to teach them. Okay, so there are a couple of words and terms that we may want to learn to be involved in the session. So the first on this slide is a bill. So a bill, we throw this word around, but it means a proposed piece of legislation. And then an appropriation. When I teach this class in person, I always go, it's the money. But an appropriation is just referring to any money that's set aside as part of a bill, or it can even just be a budget request. And then obviously the budget, it's just the state's estimate for proposed expenses and money in throughout the year. Next slide. Okay, so we are in the legislative session. It generally will start in Utah, begins in January, and it lasts 45 days. So in other states, they will either have, every other year. There are some states that only meet as a legislature every other year, but we're lucky because we get every year for 45 days. And during that session, legislators meet to go over the state budget and to vote on where all of the money is going to go for the year, and also to create or make changes to laws. Okay, next one, please. Okay, so here are 3 words that I found helpful to learn about when I first started getting into legislative advocacy. And those are the 3 L's. One is legislation, which is the actual laws and lawmaking, the regulations, the actual bill, right? It's the things that they're working on. A legislator is an individual, the person or lawmaker who is elected, works for the people, and they're working to bring about change to new and existing laws. And then the last one is the legislature. Is anyone confused yet? And that is just referring to the whole body of legislators. So the legislation, legislator, and legislature. Kind of a fun word soup. Okay, Mary, this is you.
Thank you so much, Tylee. So some of you may be familiar with the kind of how the government has these three branches. For those who aren't, we're just going to give a very brief overview. It's pretty similar at the state level in Utah as well as at the federal level. There's three different sections, essentially, of the government. There's the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. We just mentioned legislature, so as you can guess, all of those people that we're talking about right now are part of the legislative branch. Those are the people that pass laws. The executive branch administers the laws or carries them out. And the judicial branch interprets laws to make sure that the laws are in compliance with the Constitution and interprets laws as it applies to people going to court. They see if what people are doing follows the laws or breaks the laws. So some examples of groups in each of these three branches. The executive branch, the head of the executive branch is the governor and the lieutenant governor. And then all of the departments are part of the executive branch. So for example, the Department of Health and Human Services is one of the departments in the executive branch. Anytime you hear like Department of Treasury, Department of State, Department of Workforce Services, anything like that, those are all part of the executive branch because they are the ones that are carrying out all the programs. The judicial system is pretty much the court system, judges, juries, etc. And then the legislative branch is the legislature, as we mentioned before. That's the House of Representatives as well as the Senate. And in the House of Representatives in Utah, we have 75 House members. That'll be different. The number of people is different for every state. But here in Utah, it's 75 of them, and they have 2-year terms. So every 2 years, they have to run for re-election. And then the Senate in Utah has 29 Senate members, and they have 4-year terms. So half of them are running for re-election in 1 year, and then half of them 2 years later, and it just kind of switches back and forth. So they're all 4-year terms before they have to run again for re-election. And I have just pictures here of the governor and lieutenant governor up on the top. And then down on the bottom, there's Stuart Adams. He's the current Senate president, and Mike Schultz is the current House Speaker. So the leaders of those two groups. So as Tylee kind of mentioned before, the legislators don't know everything. They are not experts in all of the different areas of policy. They only know about things that they've learned about from their personal experience or their job, whatever their career is. And so they don't know, a lot of them don't know about the disability world really at all, except for what their constituents are telling them. So that's how they learn. And it's a really steep learning curve. About 1 out of 5 legislators is new every election. And so they're all just kind of trying to get up to speed on all of these different policy areas, on all of these different topics. And it can kind of be an information overload because they're trying to make decisions about hundreds of different bills on tons of different policy areas. And so that is one thing to keep in mind is we can't expect them to know everything because they're trying to take in a lot of information. So when you do reach out to a legislator, try to keep it simple, and it doesn't hurt to kind of explain background information. Don't just assume that they're going to know what DSPD is or what the waivers are. You might want to say, instead of saying DSPD like I just did, you might want to say Division for People, I can't even say it. The Division for Services for People with Disabilities. And as we said, they're not familiar with all of the different issues and language. We have a lot of jargon, we have a lot of abbreviations in the disability advocacy world. So even in the first session, some people were like, what is ABA? Don't assume that they know what the acronyms are that you're using. Try to spell them out and explain them if they don't understand what you're talking about. All right, Tylee.
Yes. So, we talked a little bit about what legislators are. Now, here's what they do. So, all legislators are assigned to, they don't always get to pick them, they're assigned to different committees. And Mary will go into a little bit more detail about what each of these do, but these are some committees of interest for us to know. So the Rules Committee decides if and where a bill is going to be heard. And the Standing Committee hears testimony and votes on bills. The Appropriations Subcommittees, remember money, they hear testimony and prioritize funding requests. And Executive Appropriations are leadership, and they determine state budget and approve those funding requests from all subcommittees. So it's kind of a big job, but these are important people to know if you're wanting to make a funding request. And then the interim committee, this is a word that I didn't define before, but the interim is the time just during the year when they're not in session during that 45-day period. And that committee meets between sessions to study issues held year-round on the third Wednesday of each month. And I put that in there because all of these meetings are always, always, always open to the public unless, well, I shouldn't say always, always, because sometimes it's posted it's a private meeting. But for the most part, any of these committee meetings are open to the public.
Yes. So this is just kind of similar to what we were just saying, but kind of narrowing in on the types of committees you're going to see most often in your advocacy efforts. So as we mentioned, appropriations, that's the budget. They're dealing with all of the budget issues, requests for money. The standing is dealing more with policies, as well as the interim. And then as Tylee said, the committee meetings are generally open to the public. And nowadays they're open, you can attend both in person or online. So that's one thing that's really great about technological advances is if you aren't able to make it up to the Capitol in Salt Lake, you can still participate in these meetings virtually online. They always have a link to join a meeting on the committee's webpage, and I'm going to show you guys that later if we have time, and I'll show you where that link would be posted so that you know how to join virtually. Each committee has its own website, which again, I'm going to show you guys later, and you can see a lot of information about the committee on their website. Technical web page, it's all on the same general website, which is the le.utah.gov. That's the legislative website. And then each committee has a page on that site. The committees that we tend to see the most often in disability related issues are Health and Human Services. There's a Senate Health and Human Services Committee, and then there's also a House Health and Human Services Committee. And then we often see these issues in Social Services Appropriations Subcommittee and the Executive Appropriations Committee. And a new committee this year is the Economic and Community Development Appropriations Subcommittee. and the independent living has been moved under that committee rather than the social services. So if you are doing a lot of advocacy around the independent living centers, then you're probably going to start seeing the economic and community development committee a lot more. All right. So since we've kind of talked about committees, I hope that gives a little background so that this slide won't be so confusing. So how a bill becomes a law. Most of you have probably seen the Schoolhouse Rock, I'm Just a Bill. This is basically that video just on one slide. So essentially, if you start at the left, you see there's some need. Someone's seeing there's a need in the community, something needs to be done about it. And then if you can get a legislator to hear your issue and agree with you, then they can run a bill. So they will draft the bill. They have there are different workers in the legislative branch that will help you draft the bill, and then that will get introduced into the legislature. So every bill gets a number during January, or if it's sometimes bills are introduced in February, even kind of late in the session. But January and February is when you'll start seeing all the bills and you'll get bill numbers. We mentioned a lot of those in the first session, like HB 300 or SB 199. So if it says HB, that means that that bill is originating in the House. So it's a representative from the House that is starting that bill, that is running that bill. If it's SB, that means it's starting in the Senate. So one of the senators is the sponsor for that bill. And so whichever place it starts in is where it will go to first. If it's HB, it starts in the House. If it's SB, it starts in the Senate. And so that first chamber, it'll get sent to a committee. Generally, I mentioned we see the Health and Human Services Committee because a lot of disability-related issues go there, but occasionally they get sent other places. For example, the one about voting as far as guardianships, that got sent to I believe the House Government Operations Committee. Last year, there was one about the subminimum wage that got sent to Business and Labor. So it's not always sent to Health and Human Services. That's the one we tend to run into the most often. So whichever committee it gets sent to, they'll have a meeting where they talk about it. They'll hear the public opinions about it. They'll hear expert opinions about it. Whichever legislator is running the bill will introduce the bill, explain why they think it's necessary, what the need is. And as I said, that's where they hear the public. So if you're wanting to go and give your opinion about a bill, like in one of these meetings, this is the time you would do it, is during one of these committee hearings. They'll ask, is there anyone from the public here to speak about this bill? And then you would raise your hand, either on Zoom, you can raise your hand if you're joining virtually, or if you're in person, you would just physically raise your hand. And then they will tell you, like, okay, come up one at a time, give your public comment. And if there's a lot of people there, they might limit you to like 60 seconds, 1 minute. But if there's only a few people there, you might get 2 or 3 minutes, but they'll tell you that before, so you know what to expect. So if you do go with a public comment, have like a 3-minute version and a 1-minute version, just in case you don't want to be ready to give 3 minutes and then they tell you you have 60 seconds and you're like, oh no, which parts do I cut out? Do that preparation beforehand. So after they hear the public comment and they kind of debate about it, they'll take a vote. And if at least more than 50%, if more than 50% vote yes, then it will continue. If more than 50% vote no, then the bill dies in committee. It didn't pass and it's done for the session. But if they voted yes, then it'll get sent to the floor debate. So for example, if it was a House bill, the House committee just voted yes, it'll get sent to the House floor, which is all 75 House of Representatives. All 75 members of the House of Representatives will hear the bill. They'll have a chance to debate about it on the floor, and then they'll take a vote. And if more than 50% of them vote yes, then the bill continues and gets sent to the other chamber. So in this example, if it was a House bill, It just passed the House. Now it'll get sent over to the Senate. In the Senate, same thing happens again. It gets assigned to a committee. The committee hears all the debates about it. They hear public comment. Again, that's a second opportunity for you to give public comment. And then they all take a vote. And if more than 50% of them vote yes, it'll get sent to the whole Senate, all 29 members. They'll debate. And then if more than 50% of them vote yes, then it gets sent to the governor to sign into law. If he vetoes it, it'll get sent back. And if the legislature really wants to pass it anyway, they can vote on it again, but they have to get at least 2/3. So at least 68% voting yes. So it's not just the simple majority anymore. More people have to say, yes, we want this, and they can override the veto. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. We'll get into the opportunities for you guys to give public comment a little bit later in this slideshow. But that's just kind of an overview of how a bill goes from an idea to a law. So when you see bills, they can be kind of confusing. So this is just a quick explanation. In the bill, when you go to the website, you'll see the bill text. It'll have a short title. So for example, this first example, SB 106. So that's SB means it started in the Senate. It was given the number 106, and then a short description title, caregiver compensation amendments. And it'll tell you what year it is. When you go to the website, the legislative website, it'll say what year it was introduced. It'll tell you who the sponsors are, and then it will have a whole big thing. The web page will, sometimes it's short, sometimes it's like pages on pages, but it gets into the details of what that bill is actually doing. They'll kind of have a description at the top, and then it'll be the actual law. Any normal text is what is already part of the law. Anything that's underlined is what the bill would be adding to the law, and anything that has that strike through crossed out is what the bill would be deleting from the law if it gets passed. And if we have time at the end, I'll show you guys the website so that you can kind of see what this looks like in real life. Okay, so we mentioned there's bills, but there's also the budget. So the legislature is also responsible for determining the state's budget. The money.
What do you need, Amelia?
So, sorry, what was that?
I think I'm on.
Okay, I don't think they were asking a question, so I'm going to keep going. But feel free to stop me if anyone has a question. So the money can come from lots of different places. It comes from the income tax, from property tax, the sales and use tax, fuel taxes. So when you fill up gas for your car, different fees, like when every year you have to register your vehicle, so registration fees, also like birth certificate fees, just different governmental fees. And then a large chunk of the budget, not all of it, obviously, but a sizable amount comes from the federal government. Each state kind of receives some federal money to help with different programs. And then that money gets spent on all sorts of things: public education, higher education like universities, Medicaid, Medicare, other social services, law enforcement, fire department, transportation, all sorts of things. So the way the state budget works is each subcommittee, appropriations subcommittee, has a section of the budget that they are responsible for. So every year they kind of take a deep dive into it. They hear from the departments, they hear from the public on what everyone thinks should be funded, what should be prioritized in the budget, and then they come up with a list of their priorities of what they think should be included in the budget. And at the end of the third week of the general session right now, By the end of the third week, they have to send their prioritized list to the Executive Appropriations Committee. So all of the appropriation subcommittees come up with their own lists for their sections of the budget, send it to the Executive Appropriations Committee, and then the Executive Appropriations Committee has the last 4 weeks of the session to look at all of that, look at all the different recommendations, and put together one single budget for everything. And generally the last week of the session, that 7th week, is when they come up and kind of propose, this is our final budget. Everyone votes on it. And then that is what gets put into practice for the next year.
Awesome.
Okay, Tylee, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. I am just always so impressed with that whole process and how you can get through all that information flawlessly. It's a lot to know, and it's really good for me even to like review this process, because I saw someone had put in the chat that it's frustrating when you don't, like, you can say what you need to say to your lawmaker, but they don't always respond, right? So the more that we know about this process and all of the steps that the legislators are going through to help us, I think the better educated we are to approach them. But this kind of brings me into like what your role is in the appropriations process. That's why we're here, right? We're here to get excited about getting involved. So what you can do is you can testify at agency budget hearings. So even on a smaller scale, you can get involved at different agencies that you support and learn from people who are in these rooms with the information that we need to use for advocating for funds or programs to continue. You can contact members of the appropriation committees and your legislators, like we had talked about. You can testify at a legislative appropriations hearing. We were in one this morning, actually, at our new committee as independent living. And it's kind of an intense process, but it's so important to do. But so like as professionals, we can go in prepared with like what we want for our agency, but then the best thing is when we have individuals who are receiving those services give their comments and say how these programs are helping them. You can also contact members of executive appropriations. If it's a funding specific request, those are the people that you'll want to talk to, because ultimately they'll decide where that money goes. So if you can get someone in executive appropriations on your team, you have a pretty great, well, you'll have a better chance of getting your request met. Okay, next one. So a couple of basic advocacy things. You do not have to be an expert. You just have to you just need to care enough to get involved and to speak up. And your personal stories and your influence is going to go so much further than you think that it will. You might think, well, I'm just one person and no one else could possibly think the way that I do. But it's not really true. There's so many people out there who are maybe a little bit more afraid to speak up, and they don't because they're not sure if they have the backing or if they're just one in a million, right? And speaking up won't guarantee that you'll win, but not speaking up guarantees that your information is not going to be heard. So your only task is to be yourself, a citizen and voter who wants programs and policies to work for those who desperately need it. And then also get involved where you're comfortable. I know I'm not the bravest or most eloquent individual, so sometimes I think of ways that I can advocate with my skill set. I can sit down and I can write out an email to a legislator and let them know, hey, if you pass this bill, this is how it will affect the disability community. So thanks for thinking of us during the session. Just something like that. I can do that. But it's just using your skills and where you're comfortable to get involved. It's still valuable even if it's small. And then here are some golden rules. Years ago, there was a director of the USILC, which is my job now. She came up with these golden rules for advocacy. Her name was Chris Fossen, and she's an incredible disability advocate. So I wanted to teach you guys these. Be fair and respectful. Be understanding. Be friendly. Be thoughtful. Be realistic and persistent. Be practical. Be a good opponent. Be informed, and be visionary. And visionary just means that you don't just come to the table with problems. You're coming to the table with some solutions as well. Okay, so I have an issue. What do I do? So first step would be to document the issue. Write it down. Take pictures if it's something in your community that you see that is maybe like an accessibility problem. We use one that's like cracks in sidewalks if it's a place where someone who uses a walker or a wheelchair wouldn't be safely able to access that area. Document. And then the next step would be to report the issue to the correct public office that oversees that specific area. The reason why we included this slide is because in our meetings that we do with public and classes we teach, a lot of the same issues come up with accessibility in your community, housing issues, and transportation things. So we want to outline that there are different places that you go for different problems. So when I say make sure to contact the correct public office, we mean you're probably not going to go straight to the governor with an issue with a bus stop in your community, right? You'd probably go to your local city or the transit authority first. You make sure you're going to the right place, and then you'll be taken more seriously with your complaint. And then your next step is to escalate the complaint. So if where you started in that office that you went to for help wasn't able to resolve your issue, then you can take it a step higher. And then always follow up. And yes, a chain of command is a perfect phrase for this, following the proper process and procedures. But that follow-up piece is important because then they'll know that you are serious and you're going to be persistent about your problem, right? That's one of the golden rules of advocacy is being persistent. And then if none of that gets you anywhere, then you contact your state or local representatives, because the first thing that they're going to ask you if it's an issue at a city level is, well, did you contact your city? And if you haven't done all of that background and homework to get that issue resolved, then they're going to be like, well, that's being a bit dramatic, and throw it out, right? So make sure you're going to the right place for the problem that you have. Okay, 3 basic steps of of advocacy, sharing your story and concerns. So number 1 is choose your issue. A lot of times we have multiple things that we want to accomplish with the legislature, right? We want to go up and solve all of our disability community's problems at once. The best way to be taken seriously is to choose one at a time and write down what concerns you about your neighborhood, community, or the state budget. What obstacles do Utahns with disabilities face that you feel are not being addressed? And then are there any budget changes that will affect Utahns with disabilities that need to be amended? Just to name a few. And then number 2, obviously, is know who to talk to. So who can help you, who represents you. You can use this tool to find your local community elected officials. is this vote.utah.gov. It'll show you who is currently in office for your district or for your county or city. But if you want to find your legislator and you're dealing with a policy issue, then we'll get to learn how to do that in a little bit. I think we'll have time, Mary. I think we will. Okay, and then number 3 is obviously communicating your views. So meeting with committee members, senators, and representatives will hear your issues either in person, by email, or by telephone. So those are our 3 steps. Oh, I'll do this one too. Sorry, Mary. So we wanted to point out that life stories are pretty complex. There's a lot of details involved in your whole life story. So the personal story that you use for advocacy should definitely be a simplified version. You don't need to tell them all about your day and all the extra details, because the main message and the most important part gets lost in that. So if there's a lot of like feeling things and this hurt my everything, and it's very simple and straightforward will be your best bet. Be brief and friendly. Don't go in there trying to start a fight, because likely the first thing they'll do is put up their stops and they'll not want to listen anymore. So make sure you're friendly. I don't
Did we lose Tylee?
I think so.
I think she froze. Yeah, she's frozen.
Okay. Well, I guess I will take over for a minute until she comes back.
Oh yeah,
So-
they're all frozen.
Oh, are you back?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes.
That was exciting. Oh, internet. Okay. I'm not sure where I froze.
I think to demonstrate how you've been directly impacted.
Thank you, Mary. Okay. So demonstrate how this specifically impacts you. It's best to speak for yourself, because they'll connect it to like an individual, like they can see you and how it's impacted you. That's powerful. And then identify the issue, bill, or budget item of concern. This is important because they hear a lot. Like Mary pointed out, there's hundreds of bills and budget requests that come across their desk at any given time. So if you're sending an email or if you're giving public comment, make sure that you identify the specific bill or budget item so that they know where to categorize your request. And then ask them to support your position, and then always thank them for their time, because we want to be polite when we go in and represent the disability community.
Yes. So, oh, and one more thing about asking them to support. If you are going, I would just always suggest go as a citizen so that you can say, please vote this way. If you're going as a representative of an organization, ask your organization, like whoever your boss is, whoever your leader is, ask them if you're allowed to tell the legislators to vote a certain way. For example, state employees cannot do that if they were representing the state. They can only do that if they are representing themselves as a citizen. So that's just one thing. But if you guys are going just as a citizen, you're free to ask them to vote a certain way or whatever it is that you want. So we're going to go very quickly through this because we're almost out of time. But composing your story, if you are a constituent, that means you are a member that lives in their district. So they all have a geographic area that they represent. So if you're representing, or if you're sending an email or a letter to your representative, be sure to tell them I am your constituent. That'll be more likely to get your voice prioritized. But you're still free to contact other legislators that aren't over your district as well. Basically, this is just kind of a basic template. introduce yourself. What is your name? What city do you live in? Share 2 to 3 sentences about you that kind of explain how you're related to this situation. Either I'm a person with a disability, I'm a working person with a disability, my family member has a disability. Kind of let them know how you're connected to this issue. Tell them what your concern is, and then have a request for action, what you want them to do about it. If that is during the session, you're probably asking them to vote yes or no on something. But if it's during the rest of the year, during the interim, your request for action might be, can you come to a town hall meeting where we'll be discussing this issue? Or I would love to have a meeting with you to tell you more about this issue, something like that. Tonight is a great example of being able to talk with legislators. You'll be able to kind of give them some information. Tylee, did you want to say anything more about the reception tonight?
Sure. I was just going to say, make sure the most important thing would be that you invite your legislator to come to the event. It's great when all of our disability community shows up, but if they don't know that we're there, I mean, I know they've all gotten an invitation from the Legislative Coalition, but it's more impactful, I feel, if you reach out as a constituent and say, hey, I'm going to be there tonight, would love to say hi. And then, so try to leave an impression too. So like when you go, make sure you come with just a little idea of what you would like them to keep their eye out for when they're voting this session. And we can tell them just a simple thank you for showing up for the disability community. But that reception will take place tonight. You guys probably already know this, but it'll take place tonight, 4:30 to 6 p.m. And plan on dressing professionally. That doesn't mean that you show up in a suit and tie. You can if you want to. I think that's great. But you don't have to. Just come in something clean with no holes. Prepare to represent yourself and the disability community appropriately. And then if you haven't, or if you don't get a chance to talk with your legislator, because sometimes you won't, sometimes you won't get a chance to talk. There's a lot of us there. So your presence is still impactful. So please do come.
All right, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to show you the website really quick, and then we will be done. The website you guys can go to is le.utah.gov. I would encourage you guys to kind of explore it on your own, especially since we don't have time to kind of show you everything. But, oops, let me see if I can share it. That will be the last thing we do, if I'm able to do so. Uh-oh. Let's see. If I can't do it, we'll move on. But okay, there we go. Share. So this is what the legislative website looks like. You can go up here, this top tab. You've got legislators. You can click Find by Address/Map, and that is where you can put in your street address. I will just put in a random one really quick to show you. And it'll show you who your representative is and who your senator is. And if you click on their name, it will take you to a web page that has a phone number for them, their email address, and an address where you can send letters to. So that's a great resource. And then as far as committees, up here on the top in the middle, you can look at the different committees. Let's say Appropriations Committee, for example, Social Services, and then it'll show you all of their meeting days, times, and then whichever one you click on, it'll show you where it is. So room 30 in the House building, and it'll show you everything they're talking about that day, that meeting. And then over here on the right, you can see a list of all of the people on that committee. And these are all live links. So if you click it, it'll take you to their webpage with their contact information. And then I don't have time to show you a bill, but if you go up here at the top, it says bills. You can click 2025. and then you can see all the bills and you can click on it to read more information about it. So that's just
Awesome.
kind of a quick overview, but that is it. So
I'm impressed. We got through that quick. We might get kicked out.
we're going to get kicked out in about 30 seconds. Can you see the
Hey.
slideshow again, or is it gone?
I can see it enough. This will be good. So this last idea is just what we wanted to leave you with as you're coming to think about advocating. But your only task is to be yourself, a citizen and voter who wants government policies to work for the most vulnerable as well as they do for the most powerful, as a quote by Nancy Armady. And I just wanted to congratulate you all for getting involved in legislative advocacy. We need your voices and we need your passion, and we're glad that you took this step to learn how.
All right.